Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant. After what feels like an exceptionally long wait, the Oculus Rift was finally released this week on the 28th of March. Now, by all accounts, it's been a very good release so far, at least in terms of the technology. There have been a few hiccups with people not quite receiving their orders yet, despite them pre-ordering them very early on. For many people though, the technology really does seem to have met all expectations. Unfortunately for me, I still don't have a consumer version of the Oculus Rift, but I do still have my lowly DK2 here. I'm still on the fence a bit actually, as to whether I'm going to order one or not, and we'll get into the reasons for that a bit further on in this video. But I do want to talk about my experiences with the new updated runtime for Oculus Rift. It's now on 1.3 in the software, as well as their new home, which is the Oculus Store, along with all the elements that go with it. So on to Elite Dangerous then. The new 1.3 runtime, along with the update that Frontier posted for Elite Dangerous this last week actually, has made a massive difference to the overall experience of it. And this is something that just cannot be overstated. The quality of the image, the performance of the game within the VR has improved dramatically, and that's just on the DK2. It really is like having a step up in hardware. And one of the main reasons for this is the introduction of asynchronous time warp by Oculus. And this is a little bit of software technology that allows the frame rate for head tracking to be rendered independently to the frame rate of the game. And frame rate, of course, has always been an issue for VR. With the DK2, the panel runs at 75 Hz, and generally speaking, you need to maintain a frame rate of 75 frames per second in order to maintain the smooth experience of VR. And with the consumer version of the Rift, that needs to be 90 frames a second. But this new bit of technology means that if the game drops below 75 frames a second or drops below 90 frames a second, it can even get as low as 45 frames a second. You will still have nice smooth head tracking. And that's really very important, because as you're turning your head around within the environment, if you get a low frame rate, you get a lot of judder, a lot of jerkiness that ultimately makes for a very poor experience and can introduce a lot of nausea as well. But what happens now is that when the frame rate within the game world that gets low, the head tracking actually maintains a nice smooth motion. So you look around the game world and everything flows nice and smooth as you turn your head. But the animations, the frame rates outside your cockpit can sometimes get a little bit slow and a little bit juddery. But this is a wholly different type of experience, and it really doesn't have the negative impact that it once would have done. So this really is a massive change for Elite Dangerous, and probably indeed any other game related to VR. Another massive improvement though for Elite Dangerous is the resolution within the game. The text is now much more readable than it ever used to be. Even the default orange text and even white text is much more readable. I'm not quite sure how Frontier have achieved this, but with a new runtime, it's actually possible to render parts of your in-game world in super sampling, whilst another parts of the world are just rendered in the normal regular way. Super sampling is a technique where you render the image or elements of the game at a much higher resolution and then drop it down to the native resolution, and this helps maintain a much better quality. It's actually dramatically improved the visuals of Elite, even on the DK2. They've also seemed to have introduced a great anti-aliasing effect, getting rid of all the jaggies that were once there. So overall, Elite Dangerous in VR has been massively improved, even on the old Oculus Rift hardware. And much of that has come from the improved Oculus software, as well as the improved techniques that Frontier are now using within the game. Naturally, that means things look even better if you've got the consumer version of the Oculus Rift. Now, unfortunately, there are a couple of downsides, and some of them are almost game-breaking or deal-breakers for people. On the DK2, there is a bit of smearing going on, and on the consumer version of the Oculus Rift, there is some glare going on. Neither of these problems seem to be entirely fixable, and both of them have significant impacts upon the immersion of VR. Now, I can't complain too much about the effect in the DK2, because it is now a completely unsupported platform, and although Oculus have said that it will function with the runtimes up until the end of the year, beyond that is anyone's guess, and even at the moment it is completely unsupported, so any of these problems we get, there's really nothing we can do about it, and nothing we can even expect to do. And to be totally honest, I feel that is totally fair, because after all it is simply a development kit and it was never intended for consumer purposes. But that said, I will give a quick explanation of what's actually going on. And essentially it's smearing of graphical elements on the screen. Anything that's contrasted against a very dark background, pure blacks in other words, has a tendency to smear around the screen when you move your head. It's actually very distracting and can totally break the experience. It can be alleviated somewhat by playing with the gamma as well as a few other settings that people have posted, but overall it's something that's there and something that's probably not going to go away. The issues with the consumer version of the Rift though are far more significant, and although many people don't really have too much of a problem with it, for me it's something that may well be a game breaker as to whether I not actually order an Oculus Rift for myself. Here you can see the issue in action. This was posted to Reddit by Rift Revealer, and it's a glare problem. Now some of this no doubt is picked up by the camera that's actually recording through the lens here on the Oculus Rift, but what you can see is that there's essentially lens flare going on here. And this is being caused by the type of lenses that Oculus are using within the Rift. These are Fresnel lenses, and there's basically ridges within the lenses themselves, and the way the light reflects off these ridges is causing this lens flare. It only occurs in areas of high contrast, so as you can see here, white against a black background, and of course that sort of contrast is very prevalent within space games such as Elite Dangerous, so there's a lot of lens flare going on within that game apparently. Lens flare or artifacts within the game world itself are generally something that I'd not have much of a problem with, but in this case it'd be quite different because the light, the glare, is actually projected onto the lens, very similar to the effect that you'll get on if you wear glasses when light strikes against them at odd angles. Now this isn't something that's present at all within the DK2, but it is apparently present on the Vive, although on the Vive it's present to a much lesser degree, and that's because the ridges, the Fresnel ridges within the lenses are much less dense on the Vive. Now this has the bonus of course that it means that lens flares such as that, or the glare, are far less dramatic on the Vive, but it also means that the Vive has a slightly less sharper image compared to the Rift. Now the video I showed back there might overemphasize things a bit, and a few people have said that it's a bit over exaggerated, but there have also been other people that say if you take some of the halo effect away from the brightness due to the camera, that it's pretty much a spot on example of what it actually looks like. It's still very early days though, and we're not going to know just how serious the problem is for a while yet, and at least until it gets into more people's hands. But for now it's something that just might put a pause on me pressing that order button on either the Rift or the Vive. If I can get hands-on experience with this, I will of course share the experience and let you know just what is going on. And if any of you out there have got hands-on experience, I'd love to hear from you in the comments, or even send me a message just let me know how this may be affecting your experience of the Rift. So away from Elite Dangerous, there's been a whole lot of additions made to the VR experience with the release of Oculus Home, which is essentially the Oculus Store, along with a whole bunch of VR enabled games. You'll have seen recently that I've been playing Adrift, which is actually a brilliant VR experience, and whilst I tend to agree that in terms of gameplay it's somewhat lacking, it's really undeniable that in terms of an experience out there in space, it's very, very good indeed. And after all, that is what VR is all about. It's about placing you within a virtual environment, about placing you in a world that you just otherwise wouldn't be able to experience. And this is very, very powerful stuff. It's totally unlike watching a movie, it's totally unlike playing a game on your monitor. It really is something very, very new. And this is something you're going to hear about increasingly now as VR becomes more widely adopted. The Oculus Store has quite a large choice of games and experiences on it, from the likes of big games such as Elite Dangerous, Eve Valkyrie and Project Cars, all of which are very good. Well, actually I've only tried Elite Dangerous and Project Cars. Eve Valkyrie is still on my list, and hopefully I'll be able to bring some of that to you very, very soon. The Oculus Store lists their software in categories, and games aside, one of the areas that has most interested me is the entertainment category. And these are basically like little movies that play out with you right in the centre of them. Very, very powerful and moving stuff in many ways. And although most of them are extremely short, they are nonetheless very memorable. And outside of those experiences, what's really interesting is when you sit down and try and recall them and remember them at a later date. It's actually more like a memory of an actual event rather than a memory of watching a movie or something like that. And again, this is something that obviously is going to have long-term implications as to how it affects and interacts with us on a psychological and an emotional level. Something that really hasn't been spoken about much yet in the media, but no doubt something that very soon is going to be spoken about in probably quite extensive detail. And personally speaking, this is an area of VR that I'm very, very interested in myself. So, the world of virtual reality is finally here. I think it's going to be a big thing given time, and it's certainly not a gimmick. A lot of people are picking up on that fact. And I'd certainly say it's something that's here to stay. But as to whether you order a Rift or a Vive, I have no recommendation on that at the moment, as it's something I'm still waiting on myself. But if you're an early adopter and you really want to get into the VR experience, I certainly don't think it's something you'll be disappointed with on any level. It's clear that a lot of thought and an immense amount of work has been put into getting not just the Oculus Rift out here, but getting the entire experience out there in the package that it's currently formed in. It all works very smoothly, it all works flawlessly, and it's a very, very impressive experience overall, both in terms of the VR experience itself, as well as using the software and the store that comes with it. I think VR has a very bright future. And although it may be something that you can still wait for a while to jump into as things play out, so you can make the best decision for which product you want to get, I also think that jumping in as an early adopter certainly isn't going to be a mistake. I'll be back soon with more VR related videos. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time. Yes, that's one humongous mountain, but so far the event had been fairly easy going, although unfortunately we had lost a few SRVs, but that was nothing compared to what was to come.